Welcome to video 8.2 for the UOIT AEDT program's Assessment for Adult Learning in a Digital Context course. In this video, we will consider some of the examples of classroom assessment techniques that you have hopefully brainstormed as you watch the first video and explore some examples. As you progress through the video, please consider these guiding questions. Let's look at some examples of various C.A.T.S. Again, not the feline type, but classroom assessment techniques. The previous video described classroom assessment techniques as the following. If you need to pause to review, please do so now. As previously mentioned, a frequently cited resource for instructors within higher education comes from Angelo and Cross. Some of the examples examined in this video are drawn from Angelo and Cross. So, Angelo and Cross have organized various types of classroom assessment techniques within this framework before you. Please take a moment to pause the video and carefully examine the framework. Consider how assessment techniques might vary based on where they fit within these categories. This will be important for your final assignment. Now, there are several web-based resources that have organized Angelo and Cross's work. The URLs before you provide the subcategories as organized by Angelo and Cross within their framework. Please ensure you read through the material as indicated here, which is also on the weekly readings list. They are identified here, but are detailed in the readings. In those resources, you will see the classroom assessment techniques organized around these three umbrella headings. Within these categories, the C.A.T.S. are further organized into these subcategories. Please take a moment to pause the video and carefully examine the framework. Now consider how assessment techniques may vary based on these subcategories. Again, this will be important for your final assignment. Hopefully you have reviewed the readings so that you can apply some of your understanding to these specific examples. Again, if you have not read the readings, this would be a good time to familiarize yourself with some examples as per these subcategories. Now, consider the following examples of assessment techniques. Where might an audio or video taped protocol assessment technique fit? This refers to the video or audio taping of students working through the problem-solving process as they work with others, explaining their ideas and rationale. What might be the purpose of this technique? What type of evidence of student learning would one try to collect? Does it have to do with knowledge or recall, analysis and critical thinking, synthesis and creative thinking, problem solving or application? Hopefully you see that these subcategories are similar to the various levels of cognitive processes as identified by Bloom and his colleagues as discussed in previous videos. How are these similar or not to the revised Bloom's taxonomy? Pause now to consider what this technique might be trying to address as far as student learning goes. Angelo and Cross organized this classroom assessment technique as one that might gather evidence of student skill in problem solving. How does this fit? Did you place it elsewhere? Why? Is there room for overlap? What would you do after taping the students? How would you or your students use the evidence to help enhance learning? These are things to consider throughout the planning, instructional, and assessment process. Now consider this example of a classroom assessment technique. Where might a pro and con grid fit? The pro and con grid gives students opportunities to consider the pros, cons, or advantages and disadvantages, or costs and benefits of a particular topic or issue. This nudges students to examine two sides of the issue rather than simply applying one perspective. Again, what might be the purpose of this technique? What type of evidence of student learning would one try to collect? Pause now to consider what this technique might be trying to address as far as student learning goes. If you categorize this as a technique that gathers evidence of student skills in analysis and critical thinking, you're thinking in the same way as Angelo and Cross did. Why would it fit here? Could it fit somewhere else? Why? How does having students examine the two sides of a concept or issue enhance their analytical thinking skills? At what point in the instructional experience might you implement this classroom assessment technique? Or would you reserve this activity just for the end of the class? Why? What will you do with the collected evidence? What will your students do with the collective evidence? Again, please review the resources to help you address these questions. Here is another example of a classroom assessment technique. Where does this fit? A tableau refers to creating a living still scene or scenes to demonstrate concepts such as a work of art or how the heart works or how an engine functions. This can also be done via modeling, where students would act or model the processes. For example, if a student modeled how the heart works, one might model the blood flow through the various chambers of the heart. Pause to consider what type of evidence of student learning could be gathered by this technique. Pause to consider. Again, this may fit in multiple subcategories, but because this activity is performative in nature to demonstrate the application of their understanding of how the heart works, this technique best gathers evidence of student skills in application of concepts. Now, how might this happen in a digital context? How might you modify this to accommodate an online learning environment? Is this possible? Again, what happens with the evidence of student learning? What does the teacher do with the information? What does the student do with the information? Now, what would having students complete a 1-minute paper attempt to achieve? What evidence would be gathered? The 1-minute paper allows students to organize their thoughts at the end of the class by providing them with prompts such as, what is the most important thing you learned today? Or, what 2 questions do you now have at the end of the class? Why? Students would then write continuously for a short period of time and submit the paper prior to leaving class. What could the instructor do with this information then? How could this evidence or questions be addressed at the onset of the next class? Okay, so where does this fit? Based on the description, it best fits here. A strategy to gather evidence of student knowledge or understanding. Why does it fit here? Again, how could you implement this in an online environment? How would you modify? Hopefully all these questions will assist you in approaching your final assignment. Our last example of techniques for assessing course-related knowledge and skills is a concept map. A concept map allows students to draw or map out and organize ideas in a manner that makes sense to them. For example, if you were trying to make sense of assessment, you might map out and organize concepts in a manner that highlights the purposes, the types, the examples. Now this can be done on chart paper or whiteboards, but now we have many digital tools that facilitate this process. Consider a concept map that you may have developed in the past. What evidence of learning might this strategy as an assessment technique gather? Pause to consider. Again, this could very well fit into multiple categories, but in this example, it is categorized as a technique that gathers evidence of students' synthesis skills. By mapping out ideas in a creative manner, what kinds of evidence might be obtained by the students and teacher? And what could you do with the evidence? How would it further student learning? Do you have to use this strategy and any of the others we have examined only at the end of the class? Could students complete some of these activities during the class? Before? Why? Now let's look at examples of classroom assessment techniques for assessing learner attitudes, values, and self-awareness. First of all, what situations might warrant an assessment of these areas? Let's look at some examples to help you figure this out. Hopefully, you've read the resources. Now let's look at examples of classroom assessment techniques. What evidence would a course-related self-confidence survey try to gather? Let's say prior to the introduction of a challenging topic, the instructor asks students to respond to a few simple questions regarding how confident the students are with respect to a new or unfamiliar concept. What is this assessment technique trying to assess? Students' awareness of their attitudes and values, their awareness as learners, their study skills, behaviors, and strategies in approaching the course. Pause and consider what this technique is attempting to achieve, and consider also how you would implement this strategy. Would you implement this multiple times? Why? How will learners benefit by this strategy? Hopefully you determine that a survey that is addressing student levels of confidence regarding a new course topic would fit into assessing students' awareness of their attitudes and beliefs. Here's another classroom assessment technique. This is the process analysis, which refers to students recording all the steps they take to carry out a particular formal assignment. So for example, if they were completing a research paper, they would document all of the things that they did to complete the paper as they worked through the process. They would also reflect upon and comment on the steps as they progressed. For example, perhaps the researching step posed a challenge for a student. The student might note what parts were especially challenging, and then try to determine why they found that step a challenge and what things might be done in future to address this challenge. What evidence is this strategy gathering? Pause to consider or review your notes. Hopefully you ascertain that this strategy helps gather evidence of course-related learning, study skills, strategies, and behaviors. Now, why or how would this help learners? What would the instructor learn from this evidence? What would the instructor do with this evidence? What would the student do with this evidence? A focused autobiographical sketch gives students an opportunity to write a 1 or 2 page autobiography that describes one successful learning experience. The student would then describe features of the successful learning experience and analyze why that chosen learning experience was successful. Ideally, one might do this at the onset of a course. Why? How would this technique help students learn? Which, remember, is ultimately the purpose of assessment. What is a focused autobiographical sketch attempting to achieve? Pause and consider. Hopefully you realize that this strategy helps gather evidence of students' self-awareness as learners. Why? What if they are unable to do this? What would you, as the instructor, do with this evidence? What would you do with the evidence of students' self-awareness of their learning? How do techniques that assess for learner attitudes, values, and self-awareness help enhance student learning? Again, hopefully you are keeping track of these questions for your final assignment. Lastly, we are going to look at 2 examples of C.A.T.S that reflect techniques for assessing learner reactions to instruction. Take a look at both examples and consider what each technique is attempting to achieve, and why this is helpful, or not, to enhance student learning. The first is group work evaluations, which could be a simple survey to collect feedback on students' perceptions regarding their small group or teamwork. Students could address things that are going well and things that are not going well as personal steps to improve the collective group learning. Teacher-designed feedback forms refer to informal feedback collected by the instructor midway or throughout the course. This could be done in an informal, anonymous manner by answering a few questions, or even something like a stop, start, continue, or it could be done in a group, in a discussion format, to get regular feedback about the organization of the course or the instructional experiences. Okay, so now consider what evidence does each attempt to collect. Pause and consider. Hopefully you have determined that the group work evaluations gather evidence of learner reactions or perceptions about specific class activities or assignments, and the teacher-designed feedback gathers evidence of learner reactions or perceptions about teaching in general. Again, how do these 2 techniques enhance student learning, the ultimate goal of assessment? So please consider the following questions. So to recap, this video examined classroom assessment techniques as described by Angelo and Cross. It examined the various ways in which C.A.T.S could be used to gather evidence of student learning within a wide range of learning domains. Although we only looked at a few examples, ensure that you know where to access more from our readings. Bring your ideas about the synthesis questions, as well as your own questions, to class. Thanks for watching.